Hello and welcome to another video. So this video is based on a question I got from Chris at the weekend, and he was asking, basically the question is, how do you remain committed after you quit alcohol or quit some other drug? And he was asking in the context of someone who's left rehab, and he was saying that how when he left rehab he actually found that transition quite difficult, of going from that environment where there are, many people, and you're being supported, and going back to being on your own again, going back to that kind of the old triggers and all of that, and being alone, and how you cope. And this is a kind of well known as a very, very difficult transition for people. When I finally quit alcohol, it was at a temple here in Thailand called Tham Kabok. And it's coming up to, it'll be 15 years this month actually, and I'll do a video near the time. And I remember when I was at that temple, I think it was my second last day, I just fell into this kind of state of despair. Because things had gone really well. I felt I only stayed there for 10 days, it was only a short thing, but I felt that something significant had changed. But then, on this second last day, I remembered how all the times when I'd done things like gone to rehab, been in some kind of treatment, and then came out and just went back to my old ways. And I remember how in some ways it's easy, to stop doing something when you're supported, but it's on your own that the problem really starts. And I remember how concerned I was and how worried I was. And what I would say, and what I eventually realized, and what made all the difference. See, one of the things that made it difficult for me to stay away from alcohol was the sense that there was a choice, or this remaining kind of interest in returning to alcohol, even though it was always kind of in the back of my head, well, if I wait a year or a couple of years, then maybe it'll be okay. But I realized that it was never ever going to be an option. There was nothing that was going to ever happen that would ever make drinking a good idea. And I'd never kind of come to that conclusion before. There was always, there was always some reason, some possible thing. I think in the rehabs we refer to this as reservations. There was always some kind of reservation that, well, if this happened, if I was told I had a week to live, and there was always kind of something that would make it permissible. So two things happened, like for me. One was this kind of realization, well, it doesn't matter what happened in my life, that alcohol was never going to make it better. And so it didn't really matter what happened after I left rehab, that no matter how difficult it was going to be, no matter how difficult that transition was going to be, that there was no choice but to just get through it. That alcohol was no longer on the table. Where before I would say, and I wouldn't have admitted it to myself, but the previous attempts, even the time in the 90s where I stopped for 2 years, alcohol was still very much on the table. How do I know it was on the table? Because from a lot of that 2 years I was afraid I would relapse. That's how I know it was still on the table. There was no way I would have been afraid if I didn't think it was a possibility. But when I left, I finally saw that it was just not going to be possible under any circumstances for alcohol to give me what I wanted. And when I had that realization, that made things so much easier. And then about 6 months later, I did have a bit of a rough start after I left Tham Kabok. During those 6 months, there was some very difficult things happened. I had in that year and stuff, like my dad had a massive heart attack and he died soon after. Lots of difficult things, and the stress of becoming a father for the first time, which was a wonderful thing, but it's also, you know, the thinking about it beforehand was very stressful, as I couldn't even look after myself up until that point. So a lot had been going on, and I remember after about 6 months or so after I'd left Tamka Bach, I remember hitting this point where I just desperately wanted to escape my life. And I didn't think about drinking because I knew that wasn't going to work, but there was still this sense I want to somehow escape this. And then there was a realization that there just is not an escape, that the escapes don't actually work. And that was a major turning point for me. So I think the one thing that helps, you know, us, you know, to remain committed, and what's very, very important to remain committed, is this realization that there is no choice. That you finally you see that, you know, there's no situation where alcohol or any other drug is going to actually do like, you know, work. And more importantly, and this was something very important to me, is that I understood that I drank for a reason, that there was something that initially attracted me to alcohol as a young teenager, and I knew that thing was important. So I had to find a way to get the things into my life that I originally looked for with alcohol, and I did. You know, over the years I thought very carefully about this, and I realised it was basically boiled down to 3 things. That when I first started drinking, alcohol made me feel comfortable with myself. It also made me feel comfortable around other people. And it also created this sense of wonder, that life felt sort of full of wonder. And these were 3 things that I needed, because what would happen is when I did relapse, you know, when I would stop in the past and I'd relapse, it was always because of one of those was missing. You know, I'd always drink because either, you know, I just felt uncomfortable with myself, or I just, you know, I remember in the 2 years, see, I remember like up until I stopped drinking in the 90s, say I when I was drinking I found it very easy to talk to girls and stuff like that. But when I stopped drinking I could hardly talk, you know, I couldn't do that at all. And as a young, I was in my early 20s then. And to me that was a big thing, for going to someone who could speak to girls and have no problems like that. I went 2 years not being able to speak to a girl. And so, because I felt I just felt uncomfortable around other people, too self-conscious. And so of course, I was going to be tempted to relapse. And also this sense of wonder. This is a major thing that kept bringing me back to alcohol. So what I recognized is that I had to get those things. One way or the other, I had to get those things. And that's what would, you know, make a permanent break not only viable, but a life worth living. See, I don't think, for me the goal was never to stop drinking. For me the goal was to not want to drink. And that's what I had to get to. And that's what I did get to. I was telling somebody, I did a podcast for somebody this week, and I was saying, you know, during that 2 years that I stopped drinking in my mid-20s, early 20s, there was this real sense of missing out on something, of losing out on something, and it's almost like I was being penalised, I was making the best of it. And that's not the way I want to live. I mean, and it's just rubbish. I mean, you know, as far as I can see, there's nothing missing from my life. Quite the opposite. In fact, all of the things that I was looking for with alcohol, I now have in spades, in a way that I never even would have imagined possible. And I actually feel grateful to alcohol in a way that it showed me what I wanted. It kind of gave me a sense of what it was that I actually wanted. So, and it's those things. See, the problem is, for most people, that when we stop drinking, we will normally do it for negative reasons, a kind of negative motivation. And this will be things like maybe, so say, I don't know, this is, before I went to Tamka, I mean, there was actually a number of reasons, but a big thing before that would cause me to stop was fear about my health. I'd been told that my liver had been damaged, or was being damaged, and so that would really play on my mind and would get me to stop. Or other times it was, the first time I stopped when I was 20 or whatever, I did that because my girlfriend kicked me out and I wanted to get her back. And there was always these negative reasons, and that's why, I work in a rehab, and that's what I often see is people coming for negative reasons, and these negative reasons can be very, very powerful. Fear of losing a job, fear of losing respect or losing our family. They can be very, very powerful motivations to get us to start change, but they're really poor long-term motivators. And the reason is that after a few weeks, a few months, you can easily forget that pain. You can easily forget that fear. You start to feel better. So say with the health thing, after a few weeks, I would say, well, I feel healthy now. I mean, I'm obviously safe to go back and drink again, or I'm getting on a lot better now with my work colleagues. So obviously now I've matured. And now it'll be safe to drink again. So these negative things are not good long-term motivators. So it's important that if you are doing something like transitioning, from a rehab or something, that you start to focus more on these positive reasons that you're actually trying to get, and you're taking steps to get what you were initially after. Well-being, we could call it generally. That it's all about creating a better life. You need to come. It's moving from the person who say can't drink to the person who doesn't want to, because you have everything. And I've seen this over and over again. Even the people who may not return to alcohol or another drug, they just switch addictions unless they do that. And it's just so common that there's something, for most of us, there's something missing, and it's really important to start, whatever we need to do to get that. For me, the thing I need to do, I was lucky, so a few years before I finally quit at Tamka Bach, I had been on a meditation retreat in Wat Rampong. It was a 26-day intensive meditation retreat here in Thailand. And during that retreat, it was just 72 hours of constant meditation. And during that time, I experienced the peace I'd always been looking for. And that was very helpful for me, because at least I knew that what I was after did exist. And then it was only a matter of getting to it. So that was extremely helpful for me. So in regards to that transition, or just in general, remaining committed, there's two parts. So the first part then is this to not let it be an option, to not let going back to be an option. And for that to happen, we have to clearly see how alcohol or whatever just does not work. It's seeing that very, very clearly, no doubts. One of the useful exercises that I've seen people do, and I see they do it at the rehab where I work, is I think they do a group on what's called reservations, where you basically write down any event that could happen that would give you, that would make it permissible for you to relapse. So say if you wrote down if my partner ever left me, or if I lost my job, or if ended up homeless, if you write that they're reservations. And so it's really important to understand how alcohol wouldn't actually help in those situations. Or if you're told you're going to die tomorrow, that you're able to see that there's absolutely no situation where alcohol would be permissible. That's you reach that state where it's just not an option anymore. Another thing, and the most important thing, is to start getting the life that we were initially, or whatever it was that alcohol was initially giving it to us, the initial attraction. We may have forgot that initial attraction as the years went by, and we're just kind of operating from addiction. But we need to go back to the beginning, go back the way we came, and find out what was it that, because I got attracted to alcohol as a teenager, and I was very, very enthusiastic from the beginning. But my enthusiasm was different than a lot of other people's. And some people were drinking as much as me back then, but they grew out of it. For some reason, I didn't, and didn't take it to the extent I did. And the question is, like, why? Why was I so attracted? Like, what was it that really pulled me in? And I believe the answer to that question can be the answer of what we need. What we need. And usually we find the things that we're actually looking for are very, very reasonable. It's entirely reasonable to want to be comfortable in our own skin. It's entirely reasonable to want to be comfortable around other people. It's entirely reasonable to live in a world that we find engaging and interesting and wonderful. These are all very reasonable things. And they're all achievable a better way. And when you can do that, there just simply is no place for alcohol. There's no it doesn't have any avenue to sell itself to us again, because they're all covered. I mean, if you don't need anything from it, why would you ever go near it? And anytime, anyone I've ever spoken to, and I've spoken to a lot of people who have see I know, and this always sounds, people can take this as arrogant or foolish, but I know I'll never drink again, and I'm very clear about that. For me, I gave it up for good. I had to. But people will come to me, say, well, I was 20 years not drinking and I drank again. And as far as I'm concerned, there was something, the only reason that can happen is there was something missing. There was something that, and you often find with these people, there were other addictions going on still anyway, that it's only when all of it, when all of the things that we're looking for are achieved a better way, it's only then that we don't need it. Because what often happens is, like, people can stop for a long time, and it's like the thing that the reservation they had never happened. They never lost their job, or they never had to deal with a huge amount of uncertainty. And then with that thing, or they never, felt betrayed, majorly betrayed. But then maybe years later that happens, and it's just, they just can't deal with it. So I hope that's useful. Great question from Chris, and thanks for people who are leaving the comments. Like, I always appreciate them. People like So AG, I really appreciate your questions. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again.